What's up, Rockstar? This is Evan from Stock Music Musician, and in this course, you're going to learn all about how to use the amazing Grain Sample player in Reason. You're going to learn what all the buttons do on the main parts of it. You're going to learn how to use it to create your own unique textures, get your own samples, get other samples in there, and just to make super cool sounds. Now, Grain is one of many awesome sounds and synthesizers in Reason, and if you need help learning all of them, there is a link down below to a free Reason 11 cheat sheet that teaches you all of the devices in Reason at a glance. Super helpful. My gift to you. Now enjoy this class, and if you have any comments, don't hesitate to let me know, and don't forget to click that link below. Okay, so real quick, I just want to talk about what grains are. We're not going to go through the rest of the Reason instruction guide, although it's there for you if you want it. It's super useful. I definitely refer to it from time to time, but this is really, I think, a good visual example of what a grain is for granular synthesis. So up here in blue, you have the original sample. Grain is a synthesizer that mostly works with audio samples, not creating its own sound through oscillators. This audio sample is then sliced up into grains. You see these different colors here. Those could represent the 5 grains, and you notice they overlap. So these grains are then played together, re-sewn back together, basically. You can see down here, but they could be modulated separately, so they could have different pitches. They could start and stop at slightly different times. They can cross-fade into each other in different ways. And that's sort of the basics of what goes on in Grain. Basically, you take a sample, it's chopped up and processed in interesting and kind of weird and fun ways, and then you can manipulate it however you want. So one of the things that should indicate to you is that the quality of the sample going into Grain is really important. And what you do with it is then, up to you, but really experiment, not just with all the stock loaded samples, but creating your own and dropping them into Grain. Before we go farther though, I would like to thank the sponsor of this video, DistroKid. They've been really kind in supporting the channel this month. They are one of the best sites, in my opinion, for distributing your music and getting it online. If, after all this fun you have with Grain, you want to go and release an album, DistroKid makes it incredibly easy. You can get your first album ready to go and out the door probably in less than 10 minutes, assuming you've got all of your art, your files, and all of that. It's really, really straightforward. Anybody can do it. And I've got a link down below that'll get you 7% off your first year with DistroKid. So if you've ever thought about releasing your own music, go check that out and see how easy DistroKid makes it to get your first album online. So to make this really straightforward, what I want to do is show you like the most straightforward way that Grain works. So what I've done is I've recorded my own sample here of me literally just saying, this is how Grain works or something. This is how Grain works. It's almost like I said it. Then I right click to bounce it into a sample, and I'm just going to drag this sample into Grain. We can close out this other stuff. And so in the top section of Grain, this is where the sample exists. If we were just to hit play here, this is the whole sample. And we can expand it to do that whole side. But if I hit this play, it just previews the unprocessed sample. This is how Grain works. The green flag here in the blue area is where the sample playback will start when I use the synthesizer, and the red arrow is where it will stop. So we could, just stop it here, for example. And now if I play a note, well, that sounds a little chipmunky, but that's how it's working. So we're going to go through all of the processes, but the first thing I want to do for simplicity's sake, so that everything is very clear to you, is change the method that it's playing the grains and just go to tape, because tape is the most straightforward. Basically what tape does is it emulates an old-fashioned tape sampler, and it will just sort of play over and over again without much difference.
This is how grain works. 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 This is how grain works.
And as you go up and down in pitch, it slows down, and speeds up.
This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
So, as we've already seen, this here is what is being played. But if I were to move the green flag, for example, to here,
how grain works. Grain works. Grain works. Grain works.
And we could change the end.
How grain works. Grain works. Grain works. Grain works. Grain works. Grain works.
Then we get to choose what the playback style is. So, if it just freezes on a spot, which isn't that interesting for tape, or if it's a one shot, where basically you hit it and it's done.
How grain. How grain. How grain. How grain. How grain. This is how grain.
Or it could be a loop that plays over and over again, starting at the beginning.
This is how grain works. This is how grain works. This is how grain works. This is how.
Or a loop that reverses when it gets to the end, forward backwards loop, FWBW.
This is how grain works. This is how grain works. This is how grain.
And the visual feedback on this, I think, is super helpful and makes learning it really kind of fun. Freezing at the end.
This is how grain. This is how grain.
And this is a sort of, if you're using instruments, a lot of this will be much richer. Like if you were to drop in, let's create another, well, we won't do it right now, but if you were to like have like a complex pad, things get very interesting very quickly. But I want to show this to you as clearly as possible, and that's why a vocal sample I think is the best. And then finally you have envelope, which is based on the shape of envelope 1.
This is how grain.
And so if we were to change the shape of envelope 1, then the playback would be different. The top is the end, and the bottom is the beginning. And this is how quickly, the left to right is how quickly it gets to a spot. So if we bring everything down, and then we could slow it down.
This is.
So envelope can be really fun to create really unique textures. Let's turn envelope off because envelope overrides the next parameter, which is the speed of playback. All the other ones will be influenced by this. So speed is just how quickly it plays it.
This is how grain works. 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 This is how grain works.
So you'll notice on the tape function, speed affects pitch. On the other versions, these grain oscillators, it does not affect pitch, but it does still affect the speed. But you can do really cool effects with this.
This is how grain works.
Right, you could.
This is how grain works. This is how grain works. This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
So, yeah, don't think that that's a bad thing. That can be automated and used to your advantage. The limit is your creativity. Then you've got jitter, which is basically how much the playback head moves.
This is how grain works. 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 This is how grain works.
This is how grain works. This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
And I don't know if this actually works with tape or not. Let's see.
This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
Yeah, so it doesn't work with tape. This only works with the other ones, but you can hear the sound jumping around.
This is how grain works.
And if we turn jitter off, so that can be very helpful. We'll go back to tape for a little bit. Global position basically means normally when you use grain, every time you press a key on the keyboard, the sample restarts. With global position on, it will resume from where it last left off, although it keeps running.
This is how grain. This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
This is how grain works. This is how grain works. This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
So you hear how it's starting in different spots.
This
is how grain. This is how grain works.
Where if I turn it off,
this.
That's like an old school sample chopper. You can also set it. It analyzes what the root key is and it'll set it so that it works better. This isn't melodic, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, now I want to go to the next. I'm going to give you an overview of all the sections. So up top, you have the sample player, which is the heart of part one of the heart of the grain player. Then you've got this grain playback engine, which is the other part. These two parts are really where everything happens, and all of this other stuff is just icing on the cake. A little bit of this stuff is important too. So the pitch section will let you basically just choose the pitch of the sound. So, you know,
This is how grain works.
I'm playing the same key, but we're going to change the octave of the pitch.
This is how grain works.
This is how grain works.
Or the semitone.
This is how grain works. 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 This is how grain.
So for tape, you know, it affects speed and pitch. So let's just go to Spectral Grains and you can hear. So subtle tuning, and then whether or not the pitch tracks the notes you play on the keyboard. So right now, it's tracking it. If I turn it all the way off, not as much. This whole system here, the grain player and the pitch, then flows to this level knob. Let's think of it as a mini mixer. And you can then choose to either send that directly to the ADSR, the amplifier, which is basically just, you know, is it going to sound like a pad? Or is it going to sound like a pluck? Oops. So that's just a standard ADSR that you'll see on all the instruments in Reason. Or you have the option of sending it first to a filter here and then to the ADSR. So right now, there's a 24-bit ladder, or 24 decibel low-pass ladder. You've got a few different filters to choose from. You can choose the filter frequency. And these blue buttons down here just kind of modify everything. We'll get into that at the end. And then from the filter, it goes to the amplifier. Separately, you also have the ability to, and we're going to turn off the oscillator, or the grain player. And now we're just going to turn on the oscillator. So all we're hearing is a very simple oscillating synth, a simple sine wave. And you can change the waveform. And apparently it's monophonic. You can change the octave. Or not monophonic. And then how much modulation is going to it. And then also this optional you can send to the filter or just to the amplifier. And so if you're bringing them both in, so not that useful for this vocal sample, but if you've got some pads and things like that, it can be helpful to fill things out a little bit. Then you've got this whole modifier section here. Basically, the envelopes can modify stuff, and the LFOs can modify all these parameters here, either by tuning some of these knobs here, or by using the automation matrix here, which these functions here I've discussed at length in a video I did on Europa, so I'm not going to go into that because my whole theory is once you learn one synth in Reason, you can often learn all of the other ones, so I'm not going to take up your time teaching you how to use that today. Similarly, here there is the effects rack that's on most Reason instruments, and you can turn these effects on individually or not, reorder them by dragging them. Not going to get into that because that's the same on most synths, and so that's not what I'm here to teach you. I'm here to teach you how to use grain. So now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, let's talk about these actual different ways of making cool stuff happen with grain. So we've already kind of discussed the tape player. We'll get to that in a little bit. But this is, the first one I'll show you is Spectral Grains, which basically uses formant filtering, which is sort of like vocador stuff to make things sound cool. And so first you can have the harmonic snaps, which is like how much harmonics are involved. You've got a little curve here, which you can draw in how the filter will go. And also the amount of filter played. So let's just hear. And we can add more curve. And we can change the size of these chunks of grains that are being done. And you hear how kooky that is. We can also add some jitter to it. We can also choose whether it tracks the keyboard, how much of the formant is actually there. So let's turn the snap way down, the filter up. And let's turn this filtering off as well. And let's say we want it down an octave. A lot of jitter. Or, we could do it forwards, backwards. So that's sort of a vocatory fun sound. We can let's reset this because it's pretty ugly sounding. And if we go forward, and actually let's do it to one shot, maybe you get like, sorry, just forward with global position off. You could do some fun stuff with sampling like this. Especially, let's say instead of starting it on the attack, we start it just a little late. Pretty soon you got a totally twisted sample. And we could end it here and just do the forward end freeze or something. What's that? Paul Abdul song, whatever. Pretty close there, I think. Drop an oscillator on it. A dash of reverb. And maybe a little bit of compression. And a little delay. That ending glitch is really cool too, right? Especially if we do something really short like this. So, spectral grains. Let's check out the grain oscillator. Let's go back to sort of a more normal sound first so we can hear what's going on. Here you've got the pan spread, which I think is super cool. This is basically a way of, let's just get everything back to sort of normal. Basically it splits every grain up left to right, and sort of there's a pitch difference, so we'll listen to it normally. We're back after a little coffee break. So the grain oscillator is pretty cool because you can essentially set the length of the grains, how big they are, right? And then the grain spacing, which is almost like you could think of it as the resolution. How much space exists between each piece of grain that is sampled. So let's listen.
This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
If the grains are shorter,
This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
you see how it's kind of glitchy, or if they're really long.
This is how grain works. This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
And if we space them out really short, then we're going to get a very high resolution.
This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
I mean, that almost sounds like my voice, right? And if we're at the moderate length,
This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
we could use the
This
form.
is how grain works.
This is how grain works.
This is how grain works.
Turn on this pan spread.
This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
And if we do some jitter,
This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
and that's exactly what I sound like in real life. So that's pretty cool. Or on the opposite end, if we space it out, we're going to lose a lot of the resolution and it'll become less intelligible.
This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
And this kind of lets you do some cool effects like, let's turn global position on, and you'll kind of hear that like building cacophony sound.
This is how grain works. 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 This is how grain.
Actually, let's do global position off.
This is how grain works. This is how grain works.
Sounds horrible. Makes you not want to know how grain works after a while. But this can be really cool if you like capture the right part of the sound. So you're going to kind of want to just shear off some of the transients here. And now let's see what this sounds like. Turn the jitter down. More grains. Turn the attack up a little bit. And let's run it through the filter. And then maybe if we tried it in a different forward-backward loop, and let's slow it down a little bit. Or if we tried at a different part, like let's try just in this little fat section here. The longer the loop, the more variety, but if you take a really small part, it'll sound even crazier. Shorten the grain length. Back to normal spacing. So that's a very interesting way of sort of creating textures. Let's also add some envelope to that and take away a little more attack. And now let's just try it on a very small piece. You've got to just do a lot of experimenting. Like, that sounds really nice. Let's turn on the reverb and see what happens, huh? And the delay. So that's pretty cool. For the next one, we're going to go to long grains. And as the name indicates, these are just bigger pieces of the sound that's being sampled. Sampled, manipulated. But for this time, let's get away from my voice. I'm tired of hearing it. I'm sure you are as well. So we're going to go to some of the factory sounds. Music loops, fixed tempo. That's nice. So let's just select a chunk. Got some. Let's turn the filter off for now and the effects off for now. And now let's turn this amp back down. I think that's really nice and lush. More pan spread, a little bit more pitch jitter. Let's make the grains longer. A little jitter to the position. And maybe we will just do it forward. Send it to the filter, of course. Maybe no delay, but a little reverb. And a little phasing. Chorusing, actually. Let's make these, again, just, this is the resolution. How frequently is it sampling? And that's adding, a bit of the rhythm to it. You can just imagine a sick beat dropping under that. And then we've got this modulation matrix here. So let's just, have envelope 3 maybe control the pitch jitter a little bit so it'll get less over time and then reset. And the LFO maybe affecting the reverb decay and also the pan spread amount. And LFO 2 affecting the grain. I believe that's the rate. So let's just see. So, yeah, you can do a lot of really cool stuff with grain, but it's hard to figure out exactly what you're doing. So hopefully these are the tools that you need to get started. And then it's just up to you to really start figuring it out. And if we slow it down, maybe. Let's zoom in a little bit. And just see if we can't find something extra juicy in here. Like this, just long part right here, which is not actually long. Short grain length. Fast rate. And we can even just do end freeze, right? And also, here's a tip. If you want to play the thing in reverse, you can just go to envelope 1. Let's reset it. And this is basically going to start at the end and go to the beginning. Because there's not an option to choose reverse mode. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned a little bit more about grain, and hopefully this encouraged you to explore more with this awesome tool. Thanks so much for watching.